We sing this song for you tonight. Let the feeling take us higher.
Backstage at America's Got Talent, everything felt too big for them, too loud, too bright, too overwhelming. Carl, 14, and his younger brother Migo, 13, stood side by side in the far corner, gripping their worn backpacks like shields. They looked like any two ordinary Filipino schoolboys, thin, quiet, eyes wide with uncertainty. Their hair was neatly combed by their mother, their shirts tucked in with care, though the edges showed signs of being washed too many times. They didn't look like contestants. They looked like kids who accidentally wandered onto one of the world's biggest stages. Their mother, Lena, tried her best to hide her own nerves. Her hands trembled slightly as she fixed Carl's collar and smoothed out Migo's sleeve, whispering, "Anak, kayang kaya niyo too. Remember why you're here. Sing for your papa." At the mention of their father, both boys lowered their heads. Carl gently reached into his backpack and pulled out a small, slightly faded photograph. In it, a smiling man in a jeepney driver's uniform held both boys on his lap. Their father, Tate Ramon, who had spent long nights teaching them how to harmonize while the neighborhood lay dark, from brownouts, had been the one to discover their voices. He would tap his fingers on the jeepney steering wheel like a metronome and say, "Music can take you places even I can't drive you to." But that was before the accident, before everything changed. Today, the audition wasn't just a performance. It was a promise. Still, fear clung to them like a second skin. The hallways backstage buzzed with movement, crew members rushing by, makeup artists fixing last-minute details, contestants warming up with loud riffs and impossible high notes. The twins could barely hear themselves breathe. Migo tugged at Carl's sleeve. His voice was small, shaky. "Kuya, what if we mess up? What if the judges don't like us?" Carl swallowed hard, trying to steady his younger brother even though he was shaking too. "Migo, we try. That's what Papa always said, Diba. We try." But even as he said it, Carl's voice cracked. He was just as scared. A stagehand approached with a clipboard. "Carl and Migo Ramirez, you're up in 30 seconds. Both boys froze. Completely. Migo grabbed Carl's hand, squeezing tight. Their mother stepped forward, cupping both their faces in her palms. "Anik, look at me." They lifted their teary eyes to hers. "You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be brave. Your papa will be listening. He is proud already." A soft, trembling breath left Migo's lips. Carl nodded slowly, forcing strength into his legs. The stagehand called again, this time more urgently. "You're on deck." Lena placed a kiss on each of their foreheads. "Go, Anak. The world needs to hear your voices." With hesitant steps, the brothers walked toward the blinding light spilling through the stage entrance. The closer they got, the louder the audience became. Hundreds of voices, thousands of eyes waiting for something extraordinary. For two boys used to singing inside a tiny living room in Cebu, this felt like stepping into another universe. When they reached the edge of the curtain, Carl felt Migo tug his shirt. "Kuya, I can't breathe." Carl placed a hand on his brother's shoulder. "Hold my hand. We'll breathe together." They inhaled as one, exhaled as one. The last thing they did before stepping out was hold up their father's picture one more time, whispering in Tagalog, "Para sa'yo, te." Then the curtain parted. The lights hit them instantly, harsh, bright, blinding. They blinked rapidly, momentarily stunned by the sheer size of the theater. The audience hushed as they walked to center stage, two tiny figures dwarfed by a giant platform. The judges looked up from their desks. Simon's eyes narrowed, his expression unreadable. Heidi offered a warm smile, though it didn't seem to calm the boys. Sophia leaned forward curiously. Howie was already whispering something to Simon, perhaps noting their nerves. They looked ordinary, too ordinary. Few expected anything from these shy, shaky boys. Carl's voice was barely above a whisper as he introduced them. "Hello, Po. We are Carl and Migo, from Cebu, Philippines." Migo clutched the microphone with two trembling hands. "We are singing for our papa." The audience softened. Even Simon's posture changed slightly. The music began, a soft piano intro. Carl looked at Migo. Migo looked at Carl. Both nodded. And in that heartbeat, something shifted. The shy boys were still there, but behind their eyes something brave was waking up. They opened their mouths, and the world was about to hear what no one expected. The piano intro floated through the arena, soft, delicate, almost fragile. It matched the trembling silhouettes of Carl and Migo standing under the spotlight. Their shoulders were stiff, their hands shaking slightly as they held their microphones. From the audience's perspective, they still looked like two overwhelmed kids who might crack under the pressure. Then Carl inhaled, slow, deep, steady. Migo watched him, waiting for the signal only brothers could understand. Carl nodded once. And then it happened. Carl stepped into the first note, releasing a soft, clear tone that drifted across the stage like a feather carried by the wind. The sound was gentle yet astonishingly pure, so clean it made some audience members lean forward in surprise. It didn't sound like the voice of a nervous child. It sounded like someone who had something to say, someone who carried a story. Migo joined him on the very next line, two voices, one slightly higher, one warm and smooth, intertwining as naturally as if they'd been born to sing together. Because they had been. The crowd reacted instantly, first a murmur, then hushed whispers, then wide eyes, the kind of reaction that sweeps through a room when everyone realizes they might be witnessing something extraordinary. Carl's voice strengthened with each measure. His shy posture began to shift, his shoulders rising, his stance widening, as though he were finding himself inside the music. Migo followed suit, allowing the melody to pull him forward, letting emotion replace fear. The brothers made eye contact, and the transformation was instant. Shyness melted, hesitation evaporated. What remained were two young artists, powerful, precise, breathtakingly connected. As the song rose, Migo slipped under Carl's line, weaving a rich harmony that wrapped around Carl's lead like velvet. It sent a wave of sound rolling through the theater, unexpected, electrifying, and utterly captivating. Audience members gasped. A woman in the third row covered her mouth. A man filming on his phone whispered "wow" without realizing it. Back at the judges' table, Heidi's eyebrows shot up. Sophia pressed a hand to her chest, visibly moved. Howie leaned closer, trying to understand how such young, timid boys could produce such controlled, mature vocals. But Simon Cowell. Simon sat perfectly still, his expression tightened. Not harshly, but with intense focus. His eyes narrowed, studying the boys with a kind of stunned disbelief. He wasn't just impressed, he was analyzing, measuring, realizing. Halfway through the song, Carl ascended into a soaring high note that filled the entire arena. It was a note most adult singers would struggle with, but he delivered it with strength, clarity, and heartbreaking emotion. The crowd erupted. Cheers blasted upward like fireworks. Several audience members leapt to their feet. Yet Carl didn't break. He held the note, sustained it, then gently, beautifully, released it right into silence. Before that silence even settled, Migo entered with a flawlessly controlled harmony, lifting the song to an even higher emotional peak. It was the moment where everything clicked. The fear was gone. The boys weren't singing for the crowd anymore. They were singing for their father. Every line carried weight, every harmony carried memory, every lyric carried love, and the audience felt it. The camera panned backstage to their mother, Lena, who covered her mouth with trembling hands. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she watched her sons, her shy, quiet, once-in-a-corner boys, command a stage they had no idea they were worthy of. Back on stage, the final chorus hit, and both brothers lifted their voices with breathtaking unity. The auditorium seemed to vibrate with the force of their sound. Carl's high belt rang out like a declaration. Migo supported him with a lower harmony that grounded the performance, creating a blend so rich it didn't sound like two children. It sounded like a professional duo. Simon's face changed at that moment. His jaw dropped slightly, his eyebrows lifted. Then he sat back in his chair, stunned. It was the rare reaction every AGT fan recognized. The moment Simon Cowell is genuinely deeply impressed. By the time they reached the final line, the room was no longer silent. People were crying, clapping, shouting, reacting to every note. Then, the last chord, Carl and Migo ended together, perfectly synchronized. Silence fell for half a second. But only half a second, because the very next moment, boom! The arena exploded into thunderous applause. The boys flinched, startled by the sudden roar. They looked at each other in disbelief, as if unsure whether they'd even done well. But the audience knew. They had just witnessed greatness. For a long, breathless moment after the final note, The theater froze in absolute silence. Carl and Migo stood center stage, their chests rising and falling, sweat glistening on their brows. They weren't smiling, they weren't celebrating. They were simply waiting. Two terrified boys expecting judgment, not glory. Carl bit his lower lip. Migo stared at the floor, afraid to look up. They didn't yet understand what they had just done. Then, in a split second, boom! The room erupted. A wall of sound slammed into them. Cheers, whistles, applause so loud it felt like the theater itself was shaking. Audience members jumped to their feet in a wave. Some threw their hands into the air. Others clapped until their palms turned red. A few wiped tears as they shouted encouragement toward the stage. The boys flinched, their eyes widening in surprise. They had never heard a crowd cheer for them before, not at school, not in church, not anywhere. Back home in Cebu, praise was quiet, simple. This was overwhelming. Backstage, their mother, Lena, broke down completely. She pressed her hands to her heart, sobbing uncontrollably, whispering, "Papa would be so proud. Oh God, he would be so proud." On stage, the standing ovation continued. Dozens, hundreds, then thousands rising in honor of the two shy Filipino boys who just revealed superstar talent. Sofia Vergara was the first judge to speak, shouting so the boys could hear her over the roaring audience. "That was unbelievable. You boys, oh my gosh, you sing like angels." Heidi Klum shook her head in awe. "Incredible. Absolutely incredible. Your harmonies, I can't believe you're this young." Howie Mandel, leaning forward with his mouth open, added, "You came out here shaking, and now look at this room. You shocked everyone." Carl and Migo exchanged a stunned glance. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But then the energy shifted. The room got quieter, not silent, but filled with anticipation, because everyone knew the moment that mattered most was coming. Simon Cowell, he sat still, completely still. His elbows rested on the desk, his fingers interlaced, his eyes locked on the two boys as though trying to read their souls. Carl's breath hitched. Migo's knees trembled. When Simon finally spoke, his voice was soft, unexpectedly soft. "Boys." The entire theater hushed instantly. Even the crowd knew, when Simon's voice gets quiet, something big is coming. "Boys," he repeated, leaning closer, "what you just did was breathtaking." Carl gasped. Migo blinked rapidly, his eyes filling with tears. Simon continued, and for once his tone wasn't sharp or critical. It was warm, almost emotional. "You walked out here so shy, so unsure. I honestly didn't know what to expect. But then you started singing, and it was like watching two completely different people appear on stage. Your voices—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Your voices were simply beautiful. The harmonies, the emotion, the control. I felt it, all of it." The boys stared, stunned. No one had ever spoken to them like this, not with this kind of belief, not with this kind of admiration. Simon glanced toward their mother backstage, then back at the boys. "I want you to know something," he said. "Your father—" He hesitated, just for a moment. Then his voice deepened. "Your father would be incredibly proud of you." Migo broke first. A sob escaped him as tears streamed down his cheeks. Carl reached for his hand, squeezing tightly. The audience felt the moment. Every heart in the room cracked wide open. And then Simon did something that sent shockwaves through the entire theater. He stood, a full, powerful, slow standing ovation. The crowd screamed. The judges followed, Howie, Heidi, Sophia, each rising to their feet, clapping passionately. Carl's legs buckled. Migo covered his face, sobbing uncontrollably. Their mother, backstage, collapsed to her knees, overwhelmed by pride. Then the audience began chanting, "Golden buzzer, golden buzzer, golden buzzer." The boys looked around, overwhelmed, disbelieving, emotional beyond words. For the first time in their lives, they weren't just two shy boys from Cebu. They were stars. They were oved. They were celebrated. And most importantly, they were seen. The moment would be remembered forever as the night too ordinary. Filipino boys transformed into extraordinary performers right before the world's eyes.